I just want to share two basic ideas. One is an idea about finding a space where you can be a listener, where you can wait and discover what shows up, what realizations surface. Finding a space. The second thing I want to talk about is ritual. How simple a ritual is. I'm nearly always talking about one single thing, and that's lighting a candle. Just light a candle. So I want to meditate on those two things, because for me those two things are the kind of preliminary practices before you get into December. Before you get into the excitement of Christmas, before you get into the long road towards midwinter, into the darkness. Before you get there, for me, there has to be these two pillars. And so I wanted to reflect on those for this podcast. I also wanted to share with you, I suppose, two stories. They're two pieces I wrote as columns, which kind of anchor Christmas for me. So I'll begin with the one about my daughter. My daughter was born in the snow, the biggest snow for years, at the end of February, 1994, her tiny wrinkled face sideways on the pillow, as they trolleyed her out of the delivery suite, and I couldn't take my eyes off her. And the following morning I walked through the snow-covered streets in search of the cot. I went to a shop. It was an ordinary day for the shop assistant. She showed me all sorts and sizes of cots. She showed me the cheaper ones, the sensible ones, the practical and the sturdy ones, and she showed me the top of the range, the Rolls-Royce of cots. As I bundled it into the boot of the car, the snow, in a foggy swirl of flakes around me, my hands were trembling. I had just bought something for my daughter. The following weeks were peppered with little intensities of love, shared by the three of us, the new parents and the beautiful child. We lived in a bubble of glee, lit by a slanting March sun, which poured its shafts of joyful light into the room, where mother and child were recovering and building their strength. One day I came to the window, and she opened it, letting in draughts of crisp air, and I waited as she covered the baby's head for fear of a chill, before I passed in handfuls of fresh daffodils. There were moments in the dead of night when we both leaned over the cot, like two farmers at a gate, listening to the soft breathing of the bundle in the blanket. And there were other nights when her crying felt like slow torture, and we would take it in turns pacing the floor, cooing at her and jogging her in the hope that she might fall asleep just for a little while. One night all the nursery tunes I ever heard collapsed inside my head, and I ended up chanting Hare Krishna to her for an hour. But now our baby has grown up. It happens suddenly and without warning. I hadn't really noticed her stretch the length of the cot. I hadn't really noticed the speed with which she slipped from one phase to another, from new teeth to new words, to talking and walking and eating and sitting in cars and making friends and going to play school. One morning she was rattling the bars of the cot, standing there and looking out at where her parents still snored. It was that time of dawn when you can just about make out the lines on the palm of your hand. She was whining, "I want to get out, I want to get out." And she was rattling the bars of the cot as if it was a cage. In the end she had to tell us herself. One evening I saw her standing at the door of the spare room, "Look," she said, and I looked in. She was pointing at the big double bed. "My room," she said, "my room." And so it became. We bought a soft cream pastel paint and a roll of wallpaper that went horizontally around the walls with images of little smiling dolphins, and we put all her toys on blue shelves and left her there in the big double bed that she wanted so much. Going down the corridor felt like she was leaving home. She dived into her new world with shrieks of delight, and she was sleeping like the Queen of Sheba when we peeped in later that night. So we could finally recover our sense of adulthood and privacy in our own room. After 3 years we could now talk out loud, keep the light on and read, or do anything else that took our fancy after a long day. But we lay like stranded whales. The cot still sat in the corner, empty and redundant. In the morning we would dismantle it. Perhaps we could put it in the attic or in the shed. No, perhaps we could even sell it. It was a good cot. Yes, it was the Rolls-Royce of cots. But it had served its purpose, and time had moved on. I wrote that 20 years ago, so time has really moved on now. And, I said there, perhaps we'd leave it out in the shed. And that reminds me of another thing I wrote about the shed. At that time, 25 years ago, we had a galvanized shed at the back of the house. I got a fella in one time to fix it, to put a stove in. I imagined myself working in it, and this guy came along and he looked at the shed with a really sad face, a face that said, "I'm not going to renovate that." And I knew this was in his face, and I said to him, "What do you think we should do with it?" He said, "You should toss it. It'd be easier," he said, "and cheaper to build a new shed." So he did. He built a new shed, which became my studio shed. He put in a stove and lovely rafters. It's a lovely, lovely, lovely room. I love it. But at the time, as I said, there was an old galvanized shed there, and I remember writing this about it. At the back of the house, there is a galvanized shed. A green galvanized shed. It was painted green by 3 wise young men who came out of the blue one summer in a white van and said they possessed the best paint in the universe. Paint that was used by Harland and Wolff to paint ships. Paint that would never peel in an ocean of Leitrim winters. The shed is used for storing things. Plastic bags of furry toys, old furniture, the things that get edged out of life as you move along with new fashions. There are still a few bits of the bed I was born in, leaning against the wall, and the hammer we lost years ago. One high-heel shoe enfolded in light cobwebs on the windowsill, and a picture of Harry Houdini, and an old pot-bellied stove. The cat had 3 kittens in that shed 6 or 7 years ago. Then a strange Tom attacked, left the kittens strewn around the yard like little wet gloves in the rain. I made a decision about the shed. The shed would become my new workspace, a space for something new to appear. Writers are always looking for new spaces, waiting for something to happen. A new space might be a flat in Budapest or a veranda overlooking the Indian Ocean, but for me, for now, I decided it must be the shed. And writing is a passive sort of life. You don't try to make things happen. The only task of importance is to make the space, and then something happens by itself. So I cleaned out the shed, and I sat in it all day, a lone shepherd in the crib. And I know that in the future I shall often sit in its delicious, frosty, pained emptiness. What are you doing for Christmas, people will ask. Nothing. I'll be sitting by the fire, thinking of the sorrow of a mother cat when her little mites have been slaughtered, and wondering why anyone would have a picture of Harry Houdini in the shed. But what shall I do for Christmas? Nothing. I shall be doing nothing, because Christmas still means everything to me. A new humanity, a new birth, an unconditional gesture of compassion, a light in the house of the poor. And it's the stable we have to find again and again, and year after year. Our task is always to make room for Christmas. My Christmas is a stable at the back of the world, a galvanized shed behind the house, a pot-bellied stove humming with red coal, and looking so like an egg that I should not be surprised if it cracked open and Harry Houdini was flung out on the floor. Looking back now on that, the shed has become a new shed, which is a studio shed, and I'm very happy with that. But I'm also happy to say that after about 10 years of unfortunate health issues, I still think that I'm in the fullness of my health. I'm in great form, and I am so looking forward to Christmas so that I can spend time doing nothing. I think that is the real key to Christmas, is to do nothing, to find spaces. When you're not shopping, and when you're not watching television, when you're not cooking, when you're doing nothing, it creates a space to do nothing. And I find that it is the same as a writer. You know, the writer has to create a space and show up in the space, and then something happens. The blank pages don't get filled with sentences because you're motivated to be a great writer. They only get filled with sentences if you show up as a writer in your studio where nothing is happening, where you don't expect to write anything interesting that day, but you show up and you sit there. And then it's like fishing. You go to the river bank and you don't know when or how a fish is going to appear, but it does if you're patient. And writing is the same. You go and you show up in your studio and something happens. Some part of the logos, the narrative that's floating out there beyond your unconscious, comes in at you, formulates itself in your mind, and suddenly your fingers tingle and you realize you've got another little story or another little narrative. That's the mystery of writing for me. And it's the beauty of it, because it mirrors, parallels what I would consider prayer. And prayer is also creating a space to do nothing, a space to be still and do nothing. It is, in one sense, it's the most difficult thing you could do. In another sense, it is the most enriching, beautiful thing you could do. To find a space, be in the space. And then you begin to learn the language of silence, that in silence things surface in your mind and it feels like a dialogue. It feels like you're in relationship with the universe, and that in some way the universe is revealing something in the thoughts that are surfacing in your mind. This beautiful sense of prayer, of listening to what's in the heart, of allowing it to surface, knowing that God is in the heart already, surfacing in your thoughts, and that your thoughts are in some sense an expression of joy, of simple joy. There's no purpose, there's no way that you're trying to shape prayer into something else rational. You don't pray really to be a better person. You don't pray really to get a new car or to do well in the lotto or that your child might get to become a doctor. You don't pray for those things really. You don't even pray for other people. I know that you bring those anxieties about your future into the space of prayer sometimes, but really prayer is just when you're in the space. When you're just there in the space, in your room, mindful, present, aware of being here now, and in that space, something surfaces. You know you're not alone, but there's also a sense of some logos, some surfacing of a kind of wisdom that is usually in words or images. A way that the great unconscious kind of forms into patterns that you can read or decipher like you might read or decipher the teacup. It's a beautiful and wonderful thing, but you're not shaping anything. You don't have a purpose to be there. You're not bartering with some God. You're not even saying you believe in God. Because God is beyond all definitions of God anyway. And the one thing we can say about God is not God. But when we're living the mystery of just being alive, being there in that space, be still. And then there are wonderful, wonderful things that happen. Great mysteries begin to surface. And I love to do that at Christmas, because it's a very, very hectic time. And if you can manage to find some space to do that before Christmas comes up, it can be a really, really good help. A space, and then a sense of slipping away to it. We're always lighting candles. In the end, maybe there's nothing more to existence than lighting a candle. In this harsh predicament between birth and death, where we grasp and clutch fitfully at brief moments of happiness, there's nothing more consoling than the darkness of winter, the long silence of December nights, and the candle coming into its own. One year I rediscovered the candle. Up until then I had been exhausted by Christmas, bloated by Christmas, constipated by Christmas. Christmas meant only turkey and tinsel and presents and hot whiskies laced with a hint of cinnamon. Fairy lights on the tree, fairy lights for the garden, lights that changed colour in sync with the gaggle of carols. Christmas was the feckless extra pint in the cosy snug of a pub with new friends, old enemies, and the diplomatic minefield of wider family circles. Christmas was nothing more than money, electricity, and gadgets that needed batteries. Through a chink too wide there comes in no wonder. And then came one particular Christmas Eve. Just after lunch, the electricity went. Nothing to be done but cross fingers and wait in hope that the ESP men would fix it before nightfall. In the meantime, we lit nightlights. And in order to see where the cat was hiding, we lit all we had, one in every window, and lines along the mantelpiece and along the worktop in the kitchen. And lo and behold, a neighbour woman passed in her car and saw all the lights shining, and she was so moved that she phoned us. And isn't it wonderful, she said, that you're doing Christmas the old way? The old way was to light a candle in every window on Christmas Eve and again on the last day of Christmas. A moment of welcoming and a moment of bidding farewell to the festival. So on January the 6th, I decided to see out the Christmas in the old way. We had guests on the evening in question, but I watched until the daylight was almost faded from the sky and then announced that it was time for the candles. The adults were surprised. The children were astonished. First we had to count the windows, arrange the night lights on saucers, and then round the house we went, ensuring that no window, not even the toilet, was neglected. Every child wanted to light one, and they did. And suddenly, as we all watched the light outside fade, and the window lights glow more fiercely in the dark, a strange goose-pimpled hush fell on the table. Like the candle at a sick bed, the space around us glimmered and flickered with hope. Our Christmas would never be over. It was just moving away from us for a little while. Next year we would welcome its return. Those lights glowing as fierce as love in a world ravished by winter. It's just one single idea. The idea of space and showing up in the space with the expectation that something is going to happen, that you're going to receive something in this space. That's one idea that matters to me hugely. And it covers, it covers churches. It covers special places that you walk, little corners beside the lake that you love. Places you go like that are refuges in your world. Think of them as spaces where you can walk into them without any purpose or any intention, and you're just passive, but you're not really passive actually. You're actively listening. You're actively receptive. And if you're still in those spaces, it can be a church, it can be a little room in the house that you use for your own privacy. It can be a corner of the bedroom. It can be a little angle where you sit on a particular armchair and look out the window. Somewhere that you have that lovely sense of repose. And you go to it and you're still in it and you have no purpose in it. You're not taking a laptop or an iPad or a phone with you. You're not sitting down to write an email. You're just going to be there. As I say, I corrected myself. It's not passive. It's an active listening. And if you do that once a day, from now through to the Christmas, you will have a happy Christmas. And I read the other piece about lighting the candle, because even though it's a bit kind of corny as a ritual, and it's not something that I would want to repeat every year or something. I did it once or twice. It was lovely, especially with a little child in the house, but it'd be corny going round the windows. It's the kind of thing I might do on my own, though, if I was alone in the house. Or I might do it. Who knows? You never know what you do. But it's a ritual. What I'm coming to is the sense that how important it is, on the one hand, to be passive in a sacred space, and on the other hand, to find a ritual in the space which is an act of embodiment. There's a way whereby you become who you are through your imagination. You embody who you hope to be, and then you become it. And then as that person, you have another moment of imaginative power, and then you embody a new moment. So that your life is always new, because you're always going to embody something now. And what you embody now is the fruit of all the kind of good energy or action that has accumulated through your lifetime. If you think about it as experience, it's an easier way to think about it. Supposing I'm a writer, I'm writing with the Irish Times now for about 15 years. I've been off because of illness for the past 6-9 months. But in general, there's been a continuum of 16 years. I write a column a week. It's a certain size, about 750 words. It has a little story in it every week that comes from my experience, and that's something I do. The fact that I have now done that for so many hundreds and hundreds of columns means that the kind of force and concentration I have doing the next column is very strong, certainly stronger than it was when I began. And it's called experience. It's called practice. And practice improves everything. You practice how to make a cake, or how to write a column, or how to teach a class in school. And the more you do it, the more practiced you are, the deeper it becomes, and the deeper your teaching becomes, and the deeper your storytelling becomes, because you're constantly improving. It's an extraordinary thing, but you are always improving. And if you can get the negative things out of your life, really to try radically to get the negative things out of your life, just like have no time for negative things. Stand back emotionally from negative stuff on the radio, the television, especially movies. Stand back from it. Narratives that are negative. Listen if there's a political need that, we have to hear a story. I heard a story recently this week on the radio, the survivor of abuse. I nearly had to stop the car listening to it. It was so intense and important. There are some stories we need to hear, but you can still listen with a sense of care or a sense of love, a sense of compassion that doesn't actually upset you or bring you into a space of anger. What happens sometimes is that people are listening to a story, and you walk into the room and you look at them and they have a really troubled face, and you say, "What's up?" And they say, "Oh, I'm so angry. I'm just listening to that bastard on the radio." For me, it's so important when I'm listening to a story that's a negative story, and I have to listen to it because I feel, well, this is an important part of the kind of political narrative of the world I live in. Okay, but it's really hugely valuable to sort of keep an emotional distance from it as well. And certainly to keep away from generating negative emotions in yourself, keep away from generating negative ideas and thoughts, negative narratives about other people. I try to keep away from that now. And if you can strip away all that, if you can really, really strip away all the negative, you will discover that your life is amazingly beautiful in the way that it gets better and better and better. And it's no mystery that all the research suggests that the older you get, the more content and the happier you become. This journey to the end of life is one of bliss. It's one of stripping away all the negatives, tearing away all the accretions, all the anxieties, and being more and more in the present moment, in the here and now. And the journey to that space is the journey of continual embodiment of good energy. Every time you do a good deed, you have embodied a goodness that has strengthened and changed you, and you're a stronger and better person. So it's not some kind of moral balance. It's not a kind of Victorian neurosis, giving alms to the poor. No. When you give something, you're making yourself happier. you're doing something good for yourself, because there's happiness when you let go of the ego. Therefore there's happiness giving away, and the giving away becomes in some way symbolic of letting go of your ego, giving away a bit of yourself, even if it's only €1. You're giving away a bit of yourself. And no matter how small the steps forward we make, they really can accumulate into something very powerful. So what the Buddhists talk about when they're talking about karma, the ideas you'll get in Buddhism in relation to karma are just so similar to the ideas you'll get in Christianity or in any other religion. Because ultimately the bottom line, that's the rudder underneath all the religions, is this intuitive sense that if you do certain things, you will become a happy person. I'm a big guy for candles. I love to light a candle. But lighting the candle in front of an icon or in front of a photograph of somebody I love or who has passed away, it's an act of reverence, but it's also to do with me and my body. I have to use my body to do it, number one. And that's an act of embodiment. I am embodying a sense of reverence. I am embodying this sense of wanting to give you everything. You could do it, for your beloved if you were having a little dinner for two. And instead of just lighting the candle on the table as some sort of decoration, like, well, sure, everybody lights a candle nowadays when they're having dinner with their beloved. But if you just stopped for a second before you strike the match and you looked at the candle, and in some sense you kind of let your mind go down into your heart, and you open your heart then, intentionally expressing everything in the gesture of lighting the candle. So the lighting of the candle becomes an offering to the beloved, a celebration of the beloved, a sense of bring in the light, all those kind of good intentions and good feelings. You don't have to kind of think them or feel them, because you've already allowed your mind go into your heart, and your heart is lighting the candle. Your heart is invoking joy in the room. Joy. Joy is one of the most precious gifts. Joy. One sure thing about ritual is that ritual brings you joy. Doesn't matter what the ritual it is. As far as I'm concerned, it might be going to Mass, it might be lighting a candle on the table that you're going to have a lovely Indian meal at with your beloved. It doesn't matter, but there's something about ritual brings you joy, because you're beginning to express yourself with your body in a way or in a realm that transcends your body. You're dealing with senses of energy, senses of mentor deity, senses of metaphysical ground of being stuff. You're not dealing with the limited empirical reality of your belly, your need for food, your hunger, and your mastication of chicken tikka masala. You're using the food as a ritual, you're using the candlelight as a ritual. You're embodying something in your body, and so you've kind of lifted yourself out into a kind of a metaphysical dance. It's very beautiful. So they're the two kind of fundamental ways I wanted to share with you what I like to do when we're coming up to this time of Christmas. And I suggest them to you. And one is that sense of just creating a space and entering into that space and being passive and waiting and listening and being an active listener in that space and discovering that there is a presence, there is a sense that something will You'll have what again the Buddhists call realizations. You will. It is not rocket science. And it's not hocus pocus, it's not magic or something. It's the way the mind works. A psychologist will be able to explain all the why and wherefore of this better than me, because I don't know. All I know is experientially this is true, that if you have a space where you can be still and be present, then things surface. So you're not driving the agenda, you're not driving the narrative, you're actually living your life like in the passenger seat of the car. You're watching to see where you're being taken. You're watching to see where you're going, rather than living your life as if you were gripping the driving steering wheel with a determination. I'm going to Mount Bellew and I have to be there for 4 o'clock. You're living with the open hand rather than the clenched fist. And that's to create a space. As I say, it could be just a little sofa, an armchair in the corner of the room looking out at the apple tree or the cherry tree. Find it and use it. A time to use it very well is in the evening, just before the light goes. I heard a good friend of mine, Joe Finnegan, he's a presenter on Shannonside Radio, very, very, very popular radio program he has for many, many, many years. And I heard him recently talking about the fact that he goes for a walk in the evening at this time of year when it comes into the last month in December. Just before the light fades, he says, is an absolutely beautiful time to go for a walk. And the light that you can see at that time is spectacular. And I agree with him. I also agree that it's a wonderful time for sitting in that chair or sitting in that space for 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Have a break, like have an afternoon tea with some little bit of a cake or a mince pie, and have it at that time, but have it in solitude. Have it where you're giving yourself space just to be there and see what arises. Okay, that's one. Point 2 is ritual. Ritual for me, light a candle. I lit a candle in a church actually about 5 days ago, and I'm not a one for going into churches when they're full. I can't really go in there. I find it very difficult and distracting, and yet I love going into churches when they're empty. I don't mind, when there's 5 or 6 people there, all at their prayers, it can be very encouraging. But I'm going in there because it's a sacred space and I can be still. I can be actively listening. And then I can engage in a ritual. I can walk up to where, let's say, the statue of Mary is, and I can take out a little candle and I can light it, put me 50 pence in, 50 cents, and I can light my candle and then go away. People say, I lit a candle for you. I just think it's very powerful. I mean, it's poetry, it's poetic theatre, it is ritual. And it is, for me anyway, superbly healing. And it's healing not just in a kind of way that I might have a certain brokenness that I need to be patched up, which I do very often. But it's also healing in terms that each time I strip away the negativities, it's like opening a curtain and the light flows in. You strip away the negativities. Even for an afternoon, you get rid of the negativities in your brain, in your mind. And then you walk into a church and you light a candle. Or alternatively, you're having that Indian meal with the beloved and you light the candle on the table. Or alternatively, there's a little nightlight on the mantelpiece and it's beside a picture of your mammy or your daddy who passed away, and you light a candle there. Any of those kind of areas where you light a candle in a ritualistic way as a sort of an intention beyond the kind of intention in your brain. It's transcending what your brain can do. It's allowing your body to embody your faith, your hope. I think very healing, very powerful. And both those things for me come up when you get into December. Both of those things for me become kind of quiet little pillars or foundations for how I will build my Christmas. And if I have those two right, it's like it doesn't matter what other onslaught of emotion happens. I will have my quiet space. I will go there occasionally for 5-10 minutes. And sometimes, spontaneously, wherever I see the opportunity, I will light a candle. And I think that's my whole entire spirituality. It's fairly simple, you know. But I wanted to share both of those with you as we go into the edge of the beautiful winter, the complete full midwinter coming up in about 27 or 25 days. And it's a walk into the darkness, and yet it's a walk into the darkness holding a candle. It's just so much poetry and power at this time of year, particularly in Ireland, where it gets darker and darker. I'm just loving it. I'm feeling so grateful to be alive. And before I go, can I just mention, next Tuesday, I think it is, on RTE1, there's a documentary called Altered States. I did a little essay for it, so there's 4 people involved in it, a documentary about the lockdown and COVID and so forth, and they asked me to do about 15 minutes, a short essay, reflecting on how COVID might have affected us in our spiritual journeys. And that's on the television next week. Thank you for being here. Take care. Find your space. Light one candle. Thank you for being here. Bye-bye.